If you've ever felt trapped in that endless top 40 loop, you know the feeling. Same songs, same sounds, same safe choices. Like the world hit repeat and lost the button to try something new. Today, I want to introduce you to a crew that's built to do the exact opposite. Change the station entirely. Bullet End Flight is based right in the heart of the 505, Albuquerque, where the green chili runs hot and the creative energy somehow runs even hotter. And when I say Bullet End Flight, I'm not talking about one single project or one single vibe. Think of it more like a parent company to a whole family of artistic misfits. People who don't fit neatly into the usual boxes, and honestly, don't want to. At the center of everything is a mission that's pretty simple to say, but not always easy to pull off. Elevate the voices that usually get talked over. The artists who get labeled too niche, or too different, or that weird one, too Albuquerque. Whatever that's supposed to mean. If you've ever heard something like that about your work, this is your invitation to pull up a chair. Because that's not a deal breaker here. That's the whole point. Bullet End Flight is built around inclusivity, creative community building, and giving underrepresented artists the megaphone they deserve. Not as a trend, not as a marketing angle, but as the core identity. It's a response to a creative world that can feel gated, filtered, and overly polished, where the most interesting voices get told to tone it down so they can be easier to sell. And here's where it gets fun. Bullet End Flight doesn't believe in staying in one lane. Because why would you? Why drive a sedan when you could take a spaceship? The whole approach is more like, what does human expression look like across every format? And then going after all of it. Let's start with music, because that's a major part of the DNA. The mindset here isn't pick a genre and stay in it. It's more like, what's the vibe, and does it hit? That can mean the spiritual charge of gospel, the late-night pulse of house music, the smooth storytelling and emotion of R&B, or even that classic country charm where life falls apart but somehow the drink is still cold. It's not about fitting into a category. It's about making something that feels alive. But it doesn't stop at music. There's a strong dedication to the spoken word too. Podcasts that get into the real stuff, not just surface-level chatter, and poetry that doesn't play nice. The kind that lands heavy, the kind that says what people avoid saying, the kind that reminds you words can still be dangerous in the best way. Then there's film and TV writing. Getting into scripts that actually have a heartbeat. Not another recycled reboot of a reboot. Not something designed by committee to offend the fewest people possible. The focus is on stories with soul. Stories with perspective. Stories that sound like they came from real lives, in real places, with real edges. And of course, the stage. Because there is nothing like live performance. It's unpredictable, it's electric, and yeah, anything can happen. And usually does. The stage is where art stops being an idea and becomes a moment, right in front of people who can feel it in real time. So why would an artist want to plug into something like this? Because being a starving artist has been romanticized for way too long, and it doesn't need to be the default. And being a lonely artist, trying to build everything by yourself, with no village, no network, no support, That's even worse. Bullet and Flight is about building that village on purpose. The goal is to take the talent that's been brewing in the Southwest, often overlooked, often underestimated, and project it outward. Not in a please notice us kind of way, but in a we're already here, and we're bringing the whole sound with us kind of way. Bullet and Flight positions itself as a launch pad, a safety net, and the hype you didn't realize you were missing. And let's be honest, a lot of people are tired of gatekeepers. Tired of needing permission. Tired of feeling like they have to sand down everything interesting about their work to be taken seriously. If that's you, this is a space that's built for finding your tribe. People who want loud, weird, real art, and who aren't afraid to make it together. If you want to get in the mix, Deombase is https://just-dominic. And if you want the visuals, you can find the YouTube channel at Just Dominic Music. Bullet and Flight Music, LLC is the company behind it all. And the invitation is open. Check out what's being built, listen to what's coming out, and if you're ready to change the station, this is a good place to start.
Waiting for you, Christ Followers Network on Bullet and Flight Radio. Oh, on Bullet and Flight Radio.
You have said it before, maybe out loud, maybe just in your head, repeating something you heard a pastor say once. Your body is a temple. It sounds nice. It sounds like a phrase from a greeting card. And because it sounds nice, you never actually stop to ask what it means. What if that sentence was not a metaphor? What if Jesus said something almost identical about his own body years before Paul ever wrote it down, and meant it so literally that the men standing in front of him thought he had lost his mind? What if the room you have spent your whole life trying to reach was never somewhere else? What if you were already standing in it? To understand what he meant, you have to go back to the actual building he was standing in front of. Not a metaphorical one, a real one, made of stone in the middle of Jerusalem. And it had been under construction for 46 years. 46 years. An entire generation of stonemasons had lived and died working on it. It was the center of Jewish life. The place where heaven, supposedly, touched earth. One day Jesus walked into its outer courts and turned over the tables of the money changers. He drove out the men selling animals for sacrifice. It was chaos. It was public. And it drew the attention of the men in charge of the building. They asked him the only question that made sense to ask a man causing that kind of scene. What gives you the right? And instead of answering the question they asked, he answered a question they hadn't thought to ask yet. Destroy this temple, he said, and in 3 days I will raise it up. This is from the Gospel of John, chapter 2. The men in front of him did the math out loud. 46 years to build this, and you'll rebuild it in 3 days. They thought he was either insane or blasphemous, possibly both. Here is the detail almost nobody stops on. John, writing the account decades later, adds a single sentence that quietly changes everything. He was not talking about the building. Nobody in that courtyard understood what he meant. Not the priests, not the crowd, not even the men who had been following him for years. It would take his death and what came after it before anyone understood what he was pointing at. And once you see what he was pointing at, you will never read the phrase, "Your body is a temple," the same way again. To feel the weight of what he was claiming, you need to understand what a temple actually was in the world he lived in. It was not a church building the way you might picture one today, a place anyone can walk into on a Sunday. The temple in Jerusalem had a room inside it called the Holy of Holies, and that room was not open to the public. It was not open to most priests. It was not even open most days of the year. One man could enter it, the high priest, once a year. on the Day of Atonement. Before he walked in, he went through purification rituals designed to make sure nothing unclean crossed that threshold. Tradition holds that bells were sometimes attached to his robe, so that if he stopped moving inside, the priests outside would know something had gone wrong, that he might have died in the presence of what was there. A veil separated that room from everyone else, thick, heavy, deliberately impossible to see through. Before he even reached the doorway, there was a second ritual happening outside it. 2 goats were brought before the altar. One was sacrificed. The other the priest would press his hands upon, transferring the weight of the nation's failures onto its head, and then men would lead it out past the walls, past the city, into the wilderness, and let it go, empty of provisions, never to return. The Jewish people had a word for the practice long before English translators ever borrowed a phrase from it. They called it the scapegoat. Outside, while the high priest was inside, the entire waiting crowd fell into silence. Historians describe them straining to hear the small bells sewn into his robe, the only sign that he was still moving, still alive, still acceptable in that room. No news was good news. A prolonged silence was a possibility no one standing out there wanted to consider. That was the price of getting close. Not admiration, not a ticket. An animal's death, a nation's guilt physically walked into the desert, and only then, only on that one day, could one man cross the threshold everyone else was forbidden to touch. Twice a day, smoke from the incense altar drifted up through the courts, thick with cinnamon and frankincense, a scent so specific that later rabbis wrote whole pages arguing over its exact recipe. It was, among other things, a kind of border marker. If you could smell it, you were close. If you could not, you were still far from anything that counted as near. This was not casual architecture. This was centuries of theology built into stone. God's presence was real, but it was rare, guarded, located. You did not carry it with you. You traveled to it, and only a specific man could stand where it lived, and only on a specific day, after specific preparation. That is the world Jesus was standing in when he pointed at that building and made his claim. The building itself carried its own complicated history. It was Herod, a king who ruled by Rome's permission, and was never quite trusted by the people he ruled, who tore down the modest structure that had stood since the exiles returned from Babylon, and rebuilt it on a scale nobody in that land had seen before. Historians describe it as one of the largest religious platforms in the ancient world, and ancient sources say it took some 10,000 workers to raise it. Whatever his reasons, political or otherwise, the result was a building so vast that a person could stand in its outer courts and never get within 4 walls of the room that mattered most. The construction itself obeyed the same rules the finished building would enforce. Priests were specially trained as masons and carpenters because ordinary laborers were not permitted to work on the sanctuary's innermost sections at all. Even building the room was a sacred act reserved for a narrow set of hands. Josephus, the Jewish historian who saw the temple with his own eyes before it fell, described its white stone and gold facing as so bright that approaching visitors sometimes had to look away, as though staring directly at a mountain covered in snow. It was not subtle. It was built to announce from a distance that something serious lived inside it. And the building enforced that distance physically, 1 wall at a time. A Gentile could enter the outer court and go no further, warned by an inscription at the boundary that made the penalty for crossing it plain. A Jewish woman could pass 1 wall deeper. A Jewish man 1 wall deeper still. Only priests could enter the sanctuary itself, and only one priest once a year could cross the final veil. Access to God in that world was not a feeling, it was architecture, and architecture has rules. That warning was not a rule someone simply remembered later. Archaeologists actually recovered one of the inscribed stones. In 1871, a Greek warning tablet that once stood at exactly that boundary, its wording blunt. No foreigner may enter within the enclosure around the temple, it reads, and whoever is caught will have himself to blame for the death that follows, That stone still exists today in a museum in Istanbul. The threat was never rhetorical. It was carved in permanent letters and fixed to the wall. And when the high priest finally did cross that threshold, historians tell us he found the room strikingly bare. No golden statue. No towering image of a god enthroned inside, the way almost every other temple in the ancient world was built around one. By this period, even the ancient chest that had once stood there was long gone. Ancient writers outside the Bible noted this themselves, sometimes with genuine confusion. The most heavily guarded room in the known world was, by design, essentially empty. And notice something easy to miss in all of this. The outer court, the one open to everyone, including foreigners who worshipped other gods entirely, was still technically part of the temple. Nearness was graded, not denied outright, which meant the ancient world already had a category for someone who was close to God's house, but nowhere near God's presence. Familiar and distant at the same time. Sit with how much of your own life that might describe. So ask the obvious question. If that is what a temple was, guarded, rare, entered by one purified man once a year, what kind of claim was he actually making when he said his own body was one? Was he claiming to be that rare, that guarded, that singular? Or was he saying something about to change what rare even meant? Keep that question. We're going to need it. Hold that image for a moment. The empty courtyards, the layered walls, the one door nobody but a single purified man was ever allowed to cross. Because in a few minutes you're going to watch an ordinary man reach for it like it already belonged to him. Years after Jesus made that claim about himself, a man named Paul wrote a letter to a small, troubled church in the Greek city of Corinth. Buried inside that letter is the sentence you have probably heard 100 times without ever really hearing it. This is from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 6. Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God? Sit with that for a second, away from the greeting card version of the phrase. Everything you just learned about the actual temple, the 46 years, the guarded room, the one man once a year after purification. Paul is telling an ordinary congregation, people with debts and arguments and bad habits, that the thing which used to require all of that now lives inside them, not symbolically. He uses the same word for temple that everyone in that world used for the actual building in Jerusalem. What happened in that guarded room now happens quietly, constantly, in you. If that lands the way it's supposed to, it should feel like something shifting under your feet. But before you let that be the whole answer, there is something you deserve to know. Because the channel that only gives you the comfortable half of a discovery isn't actually giving you a discovery at all. The sentence you just heard was not written to comfort you. It was written as a confrontation. Paul was correcting people in that church who were treating their bodies carelessly, and part of his argument for why that mattered was this claim about the temple. And here's the detail scholars still argue about today. In the original language, every you in that sentence is plural, not your body, singular, the way most translations quietly smooth it out. It is closer to your collective body, addressed to the whole congregation, not simply to one person alone, which raises the real question. Was Paul talking about your body, or was he talking about the whole gathered church as one temple, made of many bodies together? Scholars are still divided on this. Anyone who tells you the case is closed is not being honest with you. If you're still here, I don't believe it's by accident. Most people click away when a conversation starts going this deep, but you stayed. So before we continue, can I ask you to do 3 simple things? If something in this video is awakening something inside you, let it be known. When you like this video, you're helping another seeker, someone who's still searching in the dark, find it. Think of it as passing the flame forward. Not for me, for them. If this message resonates with you, subscribe and keep walking this path with us. This isn't just another video, it's a journey, and every step reveals another layer. And if you've heard something today that finally put words to what you've been feeling deep inside, leave this in the comments. I am waking up. This is for the person who will stumble across those words and realize that they're not walking this path alone. Now, what comes next may be the very reason you were led here in the first place. So, does that mean the whole idea falls apart? If even biblical scholars can't agree on whether Paul was talking about your individual body or the entire community of believers, has "your body is a temple" become nothing more than a comforting phrase people repeat without really knowing what it means? Not at all. In fact, the uncertainty makes the passage even more fascinating. Because whether Paul was speaking to one person or to the whole church, the deeper message never actually changes. And once you see that hidden thread, the verse begins to carry far more weight than most people have ever imagined. Some biblical scholars are convinced Paul was talking about the church as a whole, one living temple made up of many people. And they're not guessing. They have solid reasons for reading it that way. The grammar points in that direction. The pronouns are plural. And throughout most of that letter, Paul isn't focused on private spirituality. He's talking about unity, about a community learning how to live as one. There's more. Earlier in that very same letter, Paul already calls the church itself God's temple. But not everyone agrees. Other scholars believe Paul really was speaking to each individual believer. They point to the immediate context, where Paul is addressing what a person does with their own body, not what happens when the church gathers together. In other words, both sides have real evidence. Neither interpretation is something you can simply dismiss. There is a detail in the original Greek that neither camp brings up as often as it deserves. In the same passage where Jesus overturns the tables, John actually uses two different Greek words for temple, not one. When he describes Jesus walking into the outer courts, driving out the money changers, he uses the word hieron, the word for the whole sprawling complex, courts and porches and all. But when Jesus makes his claim, destroy this temple, John switches words. He uses naos. And naos was never a casual word. It was reserved for the sanctuary itself. The holy place, the holy of holies, the one room behind the veil. That is not an accident of translation. It is a choice. John had the whole complex word available and used it 2 sentences earlier. He reached for the inner sanctuary word specifically for the moment Jesus pointed at his own body. Whatever else is uncertain here, this much is not. Jesus did not compare himself to a building. He compared himself to the single, most restricted, most sacred square footage that building contained. That word choice mattered so much that it followed him all the way to his trial. Both Matthew and Mark record that this very sentence, the temple sentence, was thrown back at him by witnesses testifying against him, twisted into an accusation of threatening to destroy God's house. The word he chose that day in the courtyard did not fade into a forgotten remark. It became evidence used to convict him. And this is where the picture becomes even harder to ignore. When Paul later writes to the Corinthians that their body is God's temple, he doesn't reach for the word hieron either. He reaches for naos, the very same word, the inner sanctuary word, the holy of holies word. And here's what makes that so fascinating. Paul doesn't use it just once. He uses it twice in the same letter. The first time, he applies it to the gathered church, God's people together. Later, he uses that very same word again when he's talking about the believer's body. So the question scholars still debate, did Paul mean the individual or the church? May not be a problem Paul was trying to solve at all, because he chose the same sacred word for both. This is not a fringe question invented for a video script. It is a recognized crux in New Testament scholarship, discussed in commentaries and journal articles for decades, precisely because Paul's Greek genuinely supports both readings, and Paul himself never bothered to clarify which one he meant. Some interpreters find that frustrating. Others find it exactly the point. Turn back a few pages in that same letter, to its 3rd chapter, and you find him using this word for the whole congregation in plain terms. Do you not know that you are God's temple, he writes there, and that God's Spirit dwells among you? Same letter, same author, same guarded word, applied first to the many, and a few pages later to the one. Some language scholars will caution you here, and it is worth hearing them out. By the time these documents were written, Huron and Naos had drifted closer together in everyday Greek, and a few will tell you the distinction should not carry too much weight. That caution is fair, and this channel would rather give you the honest complication than a tidy answer. But even granting that caution, one thing survives it. Nobody on any side of this debate reaches for the outer courts. Every reading, individual or corporate, careful or casual, keeps landing on the same word for the same room, the one behind the veil. Why would a Greek word choice from 2,000 years ago matter to you today in whatever room you happen to be sitting in right now? Because it means the ambiguity you have been sitting with for the last few minutes was never sloppy thinking. It was two different writers, in two different decades, independently reaching for the single most guarded word their language had, to describe something completely ordinary. A body. Yours, if you belong to him. There is also this, and it is not a matter of interpretation at all, it is simply what happened. Roman forces destroyed the actual physical building in the year 70, during a war that began less than a lifetime after Jesus stood in its courts and made his claim. The stone that took 46 years to raise did not survive 2 generations. Whichever reading of Paul's letter you find more convincing, the building itself was never going to be the permanent one. Something else was always going to have to last. So don't rush to resolve the tension just yet. Sit with it a little longer. Whichever side of that scholarly debate you find more convincing, both are still tracing their way back to the same moment, the same courtyard, the same conversation, the same man, and the same word Jesus chose. A word that wasn't surrounded by debate at all. Here's what almost nobody says out loud in either camp. Both readings might be true at the same time, and the tension between them might be the actual point. Your body matters because it is not only yours, it belongs to something larger, and that something larger is made of nothing but bodies like yours. Whichever reading you land on, one thing does not move. Paul is claiming that the most guarded, sacred space in the ancient world now has a new address. And that address is not a building. But here is what actually resolves this, and it has nothing to do with Paul at all, because before Paul ever wrote a word about temples, before there was a church in Corinth to correct, one man had already made this exact claim about one specific body with zero ambiguity about grammar or corporate reading, because he was one person talking about his own one body. The pieces are on the table now. It's time to go back to the man who set them there. Go back to that courtyard. The tables turned over, the animals loose, the money changers scrambling to gather coins off the ground. Jesus is standing in the middle of it, and the most powerful religious authorities in Jerusalem are asking him by what right he has just done this. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't cite scripture. He doesn't appeal to anyone's authority but his own. He points apparently at the temple itself, the one that took 46 years to build, the one where the guarded room and the yearly purification and the veil all lived. And he says, destroy it. And in 3 days, he says, I will raise it up. Sit in that moment for longer than you normally would. A man standing alone in front of the single most important building in his entire religious world claims that his own body outweighs it, not the temple's history, not its stone, not its 46 years of labor. Him. John tells us plainly what was happening beneath the surface of that exchange. He was speaking of the temple of his body, not a metaphor invented later by a theologian trying to make sense of it, stated directly by the man who was there, writing it down for people who needed to understand what they had witnessed and missed at the time. And this is worth sitting with, because it strips away every ambiguity that Paul's letter carries. There is no plural pronoun here to argue about. There is no debate about corporate versus individual, because there is only one man saying of his own single body that it holds what the guarded room used to hold. Whatever Paul meant later, this came first, and this had no room for debate at all. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you, in the best possible way. Nobody understood what he meant. Not that day, not for years. John tells us the disciples only remembered his words after he was raised from the dead. It took his death, and what came after it, before the sentence made any sense to anyone who heard it, which means for years people who loved him, who walked beside him, who ate with him, carried a sentence they did not understand, waiting for a moment that would finally unlock it. Now hold both claims side by side. Jesus, standing in front of the actual temple, says his own body has replaced what that building was for. Paul, years later, writing to an ordinary church full of ordinary problems, tells them that the same thing Jesus claimed about himself now applies to them, individually or corporately or somehow both. The presence that used to require 46 years of stone, one purified man, 1 day a year, a veil nobody could see through, moved, first into a body that walked and ate and bled, then somehow into every body that belongs to him. This is the buried spine of the whole story. The thing Jesus pointed at in that courtyard was never architecture. It was never really about the building at all. Even in the moment he seemed to be talking about the building. He was telling them in the middle of the loudest, most chaotic scene of his early ministry that God had already moved out of the place they thought God lived and into a body they could see standing right in front of them. Trace the line all the way through because it only looks like 4 separate stories. A guarded room only one man could ever enter. A curtain torn top to bottom at the exact hour a body was broken. A letter written years later to strangers in a Greek city who had never seen Jerusalem, reaching for that same guarded word to describe their own ordinary chest. That is not 4 stories. That is one story told in 4 places about the same room finding a new address. And here is the detail that was hiding in plain sight since the very first chapter of this. Remember the word switch. Hieron for the building he had just cleansed. Naos, the inner sanctuary word, the Holy of Holies word, for the claim he made about himself. He never called his body a hieron. He called it what stood behind the veil. John even tells us plainly that the disciples did not catch any of this at the time. It says so directly. Only after he was raised from the dead did they remember he had said this and connect it to the scripture and to the very word he had used. The word switch was there from the beginning. Nobody had the framework yet to hear it. And then, on the day he died, something happened to the actual veil, not a metaphor. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record it. At the moment Jesus took his last breath, the curtain in the temple, the very fabric separating the Holy of Holies from everyone else, tore, top to bottom. Not bottom to top, the way a man reaching upward might tear it. Top to bottom, the way something tears when it is pulled apart from above. The room that took 46 years to build, that only one man could enter, only once a year, after purification, after a goat had already carried the weight of everyone's failure into the desert. That room's own curtain came apart the moment the claim he made about his own body was finally, physically fulfilled. Whatever you believe about the historical details, that image should stop you for a second. Something guarded for centuries, defended by ritual and architecture and fear, came open in an instant. Not because someone finally earned their way in, but because the thing being protected had already moved somewhere else. And if you belong to him, that is no longer a claim about a man who lived 2,000 years ago. It is a claim about the body you are sitting in right now. So go back to the question you were asked at the very beginning of this. What if the room you have spent your whole life trying to reach was never somewhere else? You have probably spent years feeling like God was somewhere at a distance, in a building, in a Sunday morning, in a feeling you couldn't quite reach on your own, no matter how hard you performed your way toward it. And the whole time, the room was not empty. It was not waiting for you to arrive. You were already standing in it. This isn't an invitation to think less of your body. It's an invitation to see it differently, to realize that the sacred was never confined to stone. It was never confined to a building. It was never confined to a Sunday morning. And it was never something you had to travel toward. It entered a human body once, and if Jesus and Paul are right, it never really left. Right now, wherever you are watching this, don't do anything for just a moment. Just notice your breath. Feel your chest rise and fall. Feel the weight of your body resting in the chair, or the bed, or the floor beneath you. Notice how ordinary this moment feels. No stained glass, no incense, no choir, no ancient stone walls, just you. And yet, what if this ordinary moment is exactly where the whole story has been leading? For thousands of years, people traveled to find the place where they believed heaven touched earth. They crossed deserts, climbed hills, passed through gates, stood outside veils they could never cross. Generation after generation searched for a room they believed only a few could ever enter. And all this time, Jesus was pointing somewhere else. Not to another mountain, not to another building, not even to another religion. To a body, first, his own. And then, astonishingly, yours. So don't miss what that means. You are not being asked to go searching for the sacred. You are being invited to wake up to what has been closer than your next breath all along. Because if everything we've uncovered together is true, if Jesus meant what he said, if John chose that word on purpose, if Paul really carried that same idea forward, then this ordinary breath, this ordinary body, this ordinary moment, is not just biology. It is the room. The room you thought was locked behind a veil. The room you thought was somewhere else. The room you've been searching for your whole life. And perhaps, the room you've been sitting in all along. Thank you not for watching, for staying with the question. If something shifted inside you today, don't let it end here. The sacred scrolls were created for moments like this, to help these teachings move from something you understand into something you live. You'll find the link in the description and pinned in the comments section. And if you're looking for fellow seekers walking the same path, come join us in our Facebook group. The link is also in the description and the pinned comment. And if you want a quiet reminder of what you've remembered today, our sacred garments were created for exactly that. Until next time, walk gently. And remember, the kingdom was never somewhere else.
Well, the times they are a-changing fast. Some old truths just built to last. We're the Christ Following Network on Bullet and Flight Radio. Yeah, the Christ Following Network on Bullet and Flight Radio. Christ Following Network on Bullet and Flight Radio.
Bullet and Flight, fly. Bullet and Flight, fly. Bullet and Flight, Bullet and Flight, Bullet and Flight, fly. Bullet and Flight, fly. Your story, our station.